I've always liked to camp alone, ever since I was in my 20s. Something about being out there with just what you can carry on your back gives you a kind of peace you can't get anywhere else. That's what I was chasing when I took a week off work last fall and headed out to a remote area in northern Minnesota. I found it on a backcountry forum. There weren't many trip reports about it, but the topo maps looked promising. Lakes, forest, a few logging trails, and best of all, no cell service. I planned to be out there for 5 days. I packed carefully: tent, food, water filter, headlamp, extra socks, rain gear, even a flare gun just in case. I didn't expect to see anyone else. That's part of what I liked. Most of the time, I didn't. The hike in was long, around 7 miles. The first part followed a logging road that hadn't seen a truck in years. Eventually, I had to bushwhack through thick spruce and birch until I found a flat spot by a small lake. There were signs that someone had camped there before. Stones from an old fire ring and a rusted can half buried under leaves, but it had clearly been a long time. The first 2 days were quiet. I fished a little, read a paperback by the fire, watched the trees move in the wind. I spent a lot of time just sitting there, listening. It was good. It was the kind of silence you can only get when you're miles from any road. On the third day, I was sitting on a rock near the lake eating jerky when I noticed a man across the water. He wasn't close, probably 200 yards, but he stood out. Middle-aged, maybe 50, in dark clothes. He was just standing at the edge of the trees, not moving. I watched him for a minute, thinking he'd wave or maybe yell out. But he didn't. He turned around and walked back into the woods. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe he was another camper just passing through. There was no law against someone else being out there. But I didn't like how he just stood there, watching. I kept an eye out that night. Built a fire a little bigger than usual. Didn't sleep too well. In the morning, I did a perimeter check. No footprints I could see, but the forest floor was mostly pine needles and moss. Hard to track much on that. I filled my bottles at the lake, made some instant oatmeal, and tried to put it out of my head. Around noon, I took a walk to clear my thoughts, looping around the north side of the lake. That's when I found the trail camera. It was strapped to a tree, almost hidden. Newer model, 2 clean lens, no rust. I wouldn't have seen it if the sun hadn't hit the lens just right. I didn't touch it. I just stood there for a long time, staring at it. There were no game trails in that area, no signs of deer or moose. No reason for a camera there. Not unless it was watching something else. Or someone. I headed back to camp, trying not to look like I was rushing. I packed up some of my gear just in case. I didn't want to bolt right away, didn't want to panic, but I also didn't like the idea of someone spying on me out there. That night, I didn't build a fire. I stayed inside the tent, listening. I heard something just after midnight. Not close, maybe 30 yards off. A stick breaking, then nothing, not even crickets. The next morning, I found boot prints near the edge of my camp. Definitely not mine. I followed them for a bit before they disappeared into rocky ground. I started packing. I was about to leave when I saw movement in the trees. I turned and saw the same man, dark clothes, middle-aged, standing behind a deadfall about 50 feet away. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me. I grabbed my pack, slung it on, and started walking without looking back. I hiked fast, made it back to the logging road by mid-afternoon and followed it west, heading back to my car. That night, I made camp near a bend in the trail. I didn't sleep much. Thought I heard someone walking nearby around 3 a.m., but it could have been an animal. The next morning, I found another trail camera, this one pointing at the path I'd walked the day before. I didn't stop moving after that. I didn't even take breaks to eat. I made it back to my truck by mid-evening, soaked with sweat and mud. There was a note under my windshield wiper, just a piece of paper with a hand-drawn smiley face. I drove straight home, reported everything to the sheriff's office. They said they'd check it out, but I never heard back. I even posted about it online, but people thought it was a hoax, or just a paranoid camper. About a month later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photo of me sitting by the lake on that third day eating jerky, taken from across the water. I still camp, but never alone, and I never go back to Minnesota. It was my 5th year volunteering at Camp Pine Hollow when I first told the story. I hadn't planned to, not at first. It just came out one night around the fire, when the kids were wired up on esmores and ghost stories and that summer energy that never seems to run out. Most of the stories that night were the usual stuff: haunted cabins, cursed trails, shadows in the trees. But I could tell the kids were looking for something different, so I gave it to them. I remember the first time I heard about the bodies. It was long before I ever worked at the camp, probably 15 or 16 years ago. I was in high school at the time. I wasn't close to anyone involved, but the news spread around town like wildfire. The first body found was a grown man. He was stocky, tall, maybe around 200 pounds. An outdoorsman type. They found him off one of the lesser-used trails near Black Ridge, which cuts about 20 miles north of Pine Hollow. He hadn't been missing long, maybe a day or two at most. The coroner said the cause of death was sharp force trauma to the neck. Fast and clean. But what stuck out was his left hand. Half of his pointer, ring, and pinky fingers were missing. Just clean gone. No sign of animal bites. No tearing or shredding like you'd expect from a bear or a mountain lion. And they never found the fingers. It made local headlines for a day or two, but then it faded. No suspects, no witnesses, just a dead man with 3 fingers missing. A few weeks went by and another body was found. This one was a man too, but smaller, maybe in his early 20s, more lean than the last one. Similar scene, found just off a service road not far from Copper Basin. Same method of death, same fingers missing, left hand, half the pointer, ring, and pinky. Again, no fingers recovered, nothing at all left behind. It didn't take long for people to start wondering. I remember overhearing my dad talk about it with one of his friends at the local diner. Something about how the guy must have been collecting fingers, but no one could figure out why. There was no pattern to the victims at first, just men outdoors, alone. But the weirdest part was that there were no signs of struggle, no defensive wounds. It was like whoever did it got the jump on them fast. Efficient. The third body was what made people pay attention. A woman this time, smaller again. She was a hiker from out of state, maybe mid-30s. Found a few hundred yards from her campsite, same injuries. Same missing fingers. Left hand. No clues, no prints, no sign of the weapon. It didn't make sense. There were posters up for a while, and the sheriff's office even got the state involved. Still nothing. Over the next few months, the pattern continued. Every few weeks, always deep in the woods, always alone. Victims got smaller, thinner, lighter, college student, then a teenager. Always the same mutilation, and always the scene left perfectly clean. Then came the one that broke it open, in a way. It was a boy, just 15 years old. His body was found by some hunters out near Pike Valley. He was missing only 2 fingers, the ring and pinky on his left hand. That got attention. What was different this time was that the techs found a partial fingerprint at the scene. Just a smudge, really, but enough to run it through the system. Turns out it matched a record from the previous victim, the college student. He'd been arrested for petty theft a year before. The assumption, somehow his finger was used after death to touch something. That raised new questions. Was someone collecting these fingers and using them? And why always the same ones? The media went wild with it. They called him the finger collector. Dumb name, but it stuck. There were theories all over the internet. Serial killer profiles, ritualistic nonsense, organ trafficking. But none of it explained the slow progression of smaller and smaller victims. When I first took the job at Pine Hollow, I never thought I'd bring any of that up. It had mostly died down by then. The last body had been found nearly a year earlier. The woods went quiet again. People stopped talking about it. But that one night, something in me just wanted to test the waters. See what the kids would do with a story that was based on truth, even if they didn't know it. So I told them every detail I could recall. How the first guy was big. How they kept finding bodies smaller than the last. How the killer always took the same fingers. How no one ever saw him. No one ever heard a thing. And then I stood up. I pulled off my glove. My left hand was bare in the firelight, scarred, twisted. The ring and pinky finger were gone, cut off at the second knuckle. The pointer finger was there but warped, stiff. The skin pulled tight from old surgeries. Then I lunged forward. Some of the kids screamed. A few of them ran. Most just sat there frozen. I let the moment hang before I stepped back and laughed. Told them it was a work accident, that I used to work construction and got my hand caught between a beam and a support frame. Doctors managed to save the pointer, but the rest were gone. It became a camp tradition after that. Every summer, every new group, I told the same story, always with the same ending, always with the glove coming off. But I kept the true part quiet. I never told them how I actually knew about the bodies, how I saw the third one, the woman. I was out fishing alone, not far from the trail where they found her. I remember seeing something dark through the trees. I got curious. Stupidly, I walked over and found her lying there. No blood, no obvious wounds except the hand. I called it in, of course. But I never told them about the trail I saw leading away. Just faint tracks, a dragging motion, like someone had knelt there for a long time searching for something. I kept that memory to myself. What no one ever figured out was whether the killer ever stopped. Maybe he found fingers that fit. Maybe he gave up. Or maybe he just learned how to cover his tracks better. The official records show no other deaths matching the pattern. But I always wondered. 2 summers ago, we had a boy at camp who came with a prosthetic hand. Left side. He said he lost it in an accident. But I remember asking him which fingers had been gone originally. He said the pointer, ring, and pinky. I didn't push it, just let it go. But that night, I didn't tell the story. I sat by the fire and watched the kids laugh and joke around, and I thought about that fingerprint, about how it was used after death, about how small the last victim had been. And I looked down at my hand, the skin grafts, the twisting, the way the scar never fully healed. Sometimes I wonder if I tell the story to scare the kids, or to scare myself. Maybe both. I still volunteer every summer, still pitch my tent in the same spot, still wake up at night, sometimes thinking I heard something moving outside. Light steps, careful, watching, but nothing's ever there, just the woods. Still, when I tell the story, I don't embellish it. I don't need to. The details are strange enough, real enough, and when the fire burns low and the kids get quiet, I always end it the same way, that the killer was looking for fingers that fit, and he hasn't tried yours, yet. When I was younger, my family used to own a camp in the deep outskirts of Powers, Michigan. It was a hand-built log cabin with no indoor plumbing or electricity, mainly used for hunting, but my dad decided we'd spend our spring break there. The first couple of nights were mostly quiet. The cabin had an upstairs loft where there were 4 or 5 beds scattered along the floor. My sister and dad were snoring loudly, and I couldn't sleep. I was on my iPod Nano, a throwback to 2008, playing games. Just as I felt myself starting to drift off, a loud buzzing sound vibrated the walls. Came from above, sudden and jarring. I looked up at the skylight expecting to see a plane or aircraft passing overhead. Instead, I saw a strange burst of colors. It reminded me of a transformer exploding, that rainbow-like flash that pulses across the sky. It wasn't just a flicker either. It spread across the glass, almost as if it was getting closer. Panic set in. My first instinct was to wake my dad, so I threw a pillow at him. The second I did, the colors disappeared. Just like that, it was gone. In the middle of nowhere, with no electricity and the generator off, I had no way to explain what I'd just seen. I tried to rationalize it as best I could the next morning. Maybe it was some atmospheric phenomenon, or maybe I was just tired and seeing things. I decided to push it to the back of my mind, but that creeping sense of unease stuck with me. The rest of the day was uneventful. My dad and I spent most of the morning chopping wood while my sister sat by the creek with a book. We ate a quick lunch of sandwiches and chips, then went for a walk along the old logging trails that snaked through the woods. The air was still, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own breathing. No birdsong, no wind rustling the trees, just the steady crunch of our boots on the dirt path. As evening set in, I started feeling that same sense of tension. My chest felt tight, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. It wasn't fear exactly, more like I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing just beyond the tree line. Of course, there was no one. After dinner, we built a fire and sat around it until the stars came out. My dad told stories about when he was a kid, about how he and his brothers used to hike these same woods. It was calming for a while, but as the fire died down, that feeling crept back. The woods felt too dark. The silence felt heavy. When we finally went to bed, I found myself lying awake again. I kept thinking about the colors I'd seen, the way they covered the glass like they were coming closer. I was tired, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again. At some point in the night, I woke up to a sound. It was faint but steady, like a soft tapping. I sat up in bed and listened. It was coming from outside. I crept to the window, heart pounding in my chest. I could barely see anything in the dark, just the outline of the trees against the night sky. Then I noticed movement near the edge of the clearing. It wasn't an animal. It moved too smoothly, too deliberately. I strained my eyes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a person, but there was something off about the way they moved. They were low to the ground, almost crawling, but with an unnatural grace. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to wake my dad, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I just watched as the figure slowly circled the clearing. It stayed just at the edge of the trees, never coming closer, but it felt like it was watching me. It went on for what felt like hours. I stayed by the window, barely breathing, until the first light of dawn. When the sun finally came up, the figure was gone. I told my dad what I saw. He said it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a bear, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. We packed up and left that afternoon. We never talked about it again, but I never went back to that cabin. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. It wasn't a ghost, and it wasn't some supernatural force. It was something real, something living, and it was watching me. When I was younger, my family used to own a camp in the deep outskirts of Powers, Michigan. It was a hand-built log cabin with no indoor plumbing or electricity, mainly used for hunting, but my dad decided we'd spend our spring break there. The first couple of nights were mostly quiet. The cabin had an upstairs loft where there were 4 or 5 beds scattered along the floor. My sister and dad were snoring loudly, and I couldn't sleep. I was on my iPod Nano, a throwback to 2008, playing games. Just as I felt myself starting to drift off, a loud buzzing sound vibrated the walls. Came from above, sudden and jarring. I looked up at the skylight expecting to see a plane or aircraft passing overhead. Instead, I saw a strange burst of colors. It reminded me of a transformer exploding, that rainbow-like flash that pulses across the sky. It wasn't just a flicker either. It spread across the glass, almost as if it was getting closer. Panic set in. My first instinct was to wake my dad, so I threw a pillow at him. The second I did, the colors disappeared. Just like that, it was gone. In the middle of nowhere, with no electricity and the generator off, I had no way to explain what I'd just seen. I tried to rationalize it as best I could the next morning. Maybe it was some atmospheric phenomenon, or maybe I was just tired and seeing things. I decided to push it to the back of my mind, but that creeping sense of unease stuck with me. The rest of the day was uneventful. My dad and I spent most of the morning chopping wood while my sister sat by the creek with a book. We ate a quick lunch of sandwiches and chips, then went for a walk along the old logging trails that snaked through the woods. The air was still, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own breathing. No birdsong, no wind rustling the trees, just the steady crunch of our boots on the dirt path. As evening set in, I started feeling that same sense of tension. My chest felt tight, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. It wasn't fear exactly, more like I was being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing just beyond the tree line. Of course, there was no one. After dinner, we built a fire and sat around it until the stars came out. My dad told stories about when he was a kid, about how he and his brothers used to hike these same woods. It was calming for a while, but as the fire died down, that feeling crept back. The woods felt too dark. The silence felt heavy. When we finally went to bed, I found myself lying awake again. I kept thinking about the colors I'd seen, the way they covered the glass like they were coming closer. I was tired, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again. At some point in the night, I woke up to a sound. It was faint but steady, like a soft tapping. I sat up in bed and listened. It was coming from outside. I crept to the window, heart pounding in my chest. I could barely see anything in the dark, just the outline of the trees against the night sky. Then I noticed movement near the edge of the clearing. It wasn't an animal. It moved too smoothly, too deliberately. I strained my eyes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a person, but there was something off about the way they moved. They were low to the ground, almost crawling, but with an unnatural grace. I froze, heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to wake my dad, but I couldn't bring myself to move. I just watched as the figure slowly circled the clearing. It stayed just at the edge of the trees, never coming closer, but it felt like it was watching me. It went on for what felt like hours. I stayed by the window, barely breathing, until the first light of dawn. When the sun finally came up, the figure was gone. I told my dad what I saw. He said it was probably an animal, maybe a deer or a bear, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. We packed up and left that afternoon. We never talked about it again, but I never went back to that cabin. To this day, I can't explain what I saw. It wasn't a ghost, and it wasn't some supernatural force. It was something real, something living, and it was watching me. It's funny how the little things stick with you. Not the blood or the pain or the panic, but the moment right before it all started. For me, it was the sound of the zipper on my tent, stuck halfway as I was trying to open it from the inside. I remember cursing it softly, tugging at it with one hand while holding a half-lit flashlight in the other. I remember how cold my fingers were. It's always the little things. This happened a few years ago, deep in northern Michigan. It wasn't my first solo trip, and it sure wasn't the most remote place I'd been. Just a quiet stretch of state forest up near the Huron Mountains, maybe an hour from the closest little town. A couple dirt roads branching off the main highway, no service, no people. I wanted peace and time away. I brought just enough food for 3 days, my camp stove, my old tent, and a new pair of gloves my girlfriend had bought me before the trip. That detail matters, though I wish it didn't. The first day was what you'd expect. Long drive, easy hike in, and just enough struggle setting up camp to make me feel like I'd earned it. The air had that fall bite to it, and the leaves were just starting to turn. I found a spot off a deer path that looked like it hadn't seen a person all season. Flat ground, some scattered logs to sit on, and enough open space to not feel boxed in by trees. I pitched the tent, filtered water from the little creek nearby, and had a hot meal before it got dark. I stayed up until maybe 10, just sitting there in the dark, listening to the forest. I've always liked that silence. You hear more when you're still. I crawled into the tent and zipped it shut, leaving my boots just under the vestibule. The cold settled in quick, and I could feel it leaking through my sleeping bag. I put on my gloves, one at a time, flexing my fingers to warm them. Then I fell asleep. The first strange thing happened that night. I woke up sometime after midnight because I heard something outside. Not the usual crack of a twig or rustle of leaves. It was this steady, dragging noise, like something being pulled slowly over the ground. I lay there completely still, eyes open in the dark, trying to place the sound. It wasn't close at first. Maybe 30 yards away, moving slow. Too slow for a deer, too steady for a bear. It went on for a while, then stopped. I didn't sleep much after that. When morning came, I walked the edge of the site. Nothing looked disturbed. No tracks, no broken branches. I convinced myself it was probably a big porcupine or some other animal I wasn't familiar with. Still, it stayed with me, the sound. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. But I stayed. I'd come out for quiet, and I wasn't going to let nerves cut it short. That second day, I didn't hike far. Just followed the creek upstream, then backtracked to camp. I kept checking behind me, catching myself turning at every little sound. I tried to shake it off, told myself I was being stupid, but I didn't start a fire that night. I sat in the dark again, no flame, just the glow of my headlamp when I needed it. I ate cold food and got in the tent early. Before zipping it up, I checked around one last time. Still nothing. The dragging sound came back. This time it was closer. I heard it just after 1 in the morning. Started with a soft scrape, then that same slow drag. It moved from the left side of camp to the right, maybe 10 feet from the tent. I froze. I didn't sit up. I didn't breathe hard. I just lay there, eyes wide, ears straining. It didn't sound like something walking. It wasn't 2 steps or 4. It was one long pull, like someone dragging a tarp or a bag over the ground. Then silence. I didn't hear it leave. It just stopped. The sun took forever to come up. When it did, I waited another hour before I got out of the tent. I walked every inch of that camp. I found nothing again, no tracks, no disturbed leaves, no drag marks. But I felt it, that heaviness in your chest when something's wrong, when something doesn't line up. I should have left right then, but I told myself one more night, just one more. I'd hike out first thing in the morning. That day, I didn't go anywhere. I stayed close to the tent, moving around a lot, keeping busy. I sharpened my hatchet, reorganized my gear, filtered more water. I didn't sit down for long. The trees felt tighter. The wind never stopped, but it never made a sound. I know that doesn't make sense, but it's what I remember. It was like the wind moved, but the forest held its breath. That third night, I kept my gloves on in the sleeping bag. It was cold, but more than that, I didn't want to feel vulnerable. I left the zipper on the tent halfway open, just in case I needed to get out fast. I kept my boots inside. The hatchet stayed beside my head. I didn't sleep. I heard the dragging again, closer than before. But this time, it stopped directly outside the tent. I could hear breathing. Not loud, not raspy. Just steady, slow breaths. I didn't dare move. My fingers curled around the handle of the hatchet, but I didn't lift it. The breathing stayed for maybe a minute. Then I heard the tent fabric move. Something touched it. Just a gentle press, like a hand pushing against it from the outside. I don't know how long I lay there. Probably an hour. Eventually, the breathing stopped. I didn't hear it leave. I never heard footsteps. I only know it was gone when I finally unzipped the tent and looked out. Nothing. Just trees. Just the empty woods. But something had been there. Right outside. Inches away from me. I packed in 15 minutes. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I didn't even take the tent down properly. Just ripped the stakes out and stuffed it all in the pack. I started hiking before the sun broke the tree line. The air was sharp, and my breath came out fast and white. The trail out was narrow and uneven. Roots, loose rocks, patches of wet leaves. I slipped more than once. Every sound made me turn. At one point, I dropped my water bottle and let it roll off the path without chasing it. About halfway out, I stopped to catch my breath. I pulled off one glove to wipe my face. That's when I noticed the blood. It wasn't much, but it was fresh. On the fingertips of the glove. On the palm. My hand stung when I touched it. I looked closer. A thin, clean cut ran along the base of my pinky. Not deep, but not shallow either. I hadn't felt it until then. I checked the glove, it wasn't torn. Just stained. I don't remember cutting myself. Not once. Not while packing, not while walking. And it hadn't bled through until now. But the blood was there, no question. I shoved the glove back on and kept moving. I made it to the car by early afternoon. The drive back was quiet. I didn't turn on music. I didn't stop for food. I just drove, eyes forward, replaying the sound of that breathing. Weeks passed before I went through my gear. The tent smelled like pine and damp earth. The gloves were stiff with dried blood. I washed them, put them in a drawer, and didn't use them again. I still have all my fingers. But every time I look at that glove, I remember how close I came. I don't know what was out there. Maybe a person, maybe not. But it was watching. Came close. Too close. I don't tell this story often. But when I do, it's around a fire. I leave out the blood. I leave out the glove. But I always describe the sound. The dragging. The slow breath. And I tell them this. If you ever hear something outside your tent, don't wait. Don't freeze. Leave. Because if it comes back a third time, it's not just passing through. It's choosing. And next time, you might not be fast enough. I was barely. I've always loved the solitude of camping. The quiet, the vastness of the wilderness. It's the perfect escape. But this one trip was different. Started out like any other. A few days off from work, a quiet spot out in the woods, and no one else for miles. No cell service, no distractions. Just me, the trees, and the sky. I packed light. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, knife, fire starter. All the essentials. It was a spot I'd found on an old map. Not a popular trail or park. Just a place where the forest was dense and the silence was complete. I wanted to get away from it all. And for the first few hours, that's exactly what I got. I arrived around mid-afternoon. The weather was perfect, sunny, not too hot. The hike to the clearing wasn't difficult, but it was remote enough that I knew I wouldn't run into anyone else. I set up camp in the center of the clearing, the trees forming a natural boundary around me. The kind of place where you can hear every bird call, every rustling leaf. It was peaceful. Once I had the tent up, I spent some time gathering wood. I stacked it carefully near the fire pit I dug out. The sun was starting to set by then, and I knew I needed to get the fire going before it got too dark. As I sat there, watching the flames grow, I felt that deep, satisfying sense of peace that only comes from being alone in nature. That night, I ate a simple meal, freeze-dried pasta, and sat by the fire. It wasn't much, but it was all I needed. The stars came out slowly, each one piercing the black sky. The silence was perfect, the kind of quiet that seems to surround you from all directions, so complete that you can hear your own heartbeat. I wasn't scared, not yet, but then I heard it. A sound, distant at first, but unmistakable. Footsteps. Someone walking through the woods. I didn't react immediately. Could have been an animal, deer, raccoon, maybe even a bear. But it wasn't. The steps were too deliberate, too heavy. I stood up, trying to peer into the dark, but all I could see was the flickering glow of the fire. I listened closely, heart pounding in my chest. The steps were slow, deliberate, and they were getting closer. I grabbed the knife from where I'd set it on the ground, just in case. The footsteps stopped for a moment, and I waited, tense, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, just as suddenly, they started up again. Closer this time. The trees around me blocked any view of the person, if it was a person, but I could feel them getting closer, step by step. I don't know why, but I decided to call out. I think I just needed to know that it was someone else out there. Someone who could explain why they were so close to my camp without me hearing them earlier. But when I spoke, my voice sounded weak in the vast emptiness. There was no response. I waited, frozen in place. I couldn't see anyone, couldn't hear anything over the sound of my own breathing. The footsteps stopped, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, it had been my imagination. But then I heard a twig snap, followed by a grunt. The sound of someone pushing through the underbrush. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. This wasn't normal. I should have packed up and left right then. But something, stubbornness maybe, kept me rooted to the spot. I could hear the person now, just beyond the circle of light cast by my fire. I couldn't tell where they were, but I knew they were close. Suddenly, the fire shifted with a gust of wind, casting long shadows against the trees. In that instant, I saw something move, just a glimpse of something large, a figure darting behind a tree. I froze. I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. The fire crackled, the only sound filling the empty air. I waited, my grip tight on the knife, but no other sounds came. No footsteps, no rustling, nothing. Minutes passed. The fire was burning low now. The wind had picked up, and the air felt colder. I could feel it seeping into my bones. The silence was unbearable. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up slowly, reaching for my pack. I didn't want to make any noise. If there was someone out there, I didn't want them to know I was preparing to leave. I moved quietly, like a shadow, toward the edge of the camp. That's when I saw it. A boot print. A single, fresh print in the soft earth, just outside the ring of light. My heart skipped a beat. Someone had been standing there, just out of sight, watching me. I stared at the print, barely able to breathe. It was too clear, too distinct. A large, heavy boot with a deep tread. I knew it wasn't mine. I stepped back into the firelight, my mind racing. Whoever was out there, they had been close enough to leave a mark in the dirt, but far enough away to avoid being seen. I felt the panic rise in my chest. I grabbed my pack, stuffed it haphazardly with whatever I could grab, and swung it over my shoulder. I didn't care about anything else. I just needed to get out of there. I moved quickly, breaking down the camp as quietly as I could. The fire was almost out, and the trees around me felt suffocating, like they were closing in. I had to get away. I didn't know where to go, but I couldn't stay here. I headed toward the trail. It wasn't far, just a few hundred yards, maybe. I come in that way. It was my best chance at getting back to civilization. The path was narrow, winding between trees, and every step I took felt louder than the last. Every crack of a branch underfoot made my heart race. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. But no one was there. I kept walking, faster now, pushing myself forward. The darkness seemed to stretch out forever, and I felt like I was running blind through the woods. It wasn't the darkness that scared me. It was the feeling of being followed, of knowing someone was out there, just beyond the trees. At some point, I realized I had no idea where I was anymore. The trail had disappeared. I hadn't seen any signs for a while. I stopped for a moment, trying to catch my breath, and that's when I heard it again. The footsteps. This time they were closer, too close. I spun around, but there was nothing. Nothing but the trees. I moved faster, adrenaline pushing me forward. But the footsteps followed. I didn't dare turn around. I didn't want to see what was behind me. The sound of the footsteps was unmistakable now. Steady, deliberate, not a random animal or the wind. Someone was walking right behind me. My heart pounded in my chest and I started running. My pack bounced against my back as I sprinted through the underbrush, not caring about the branches that scraped at my skin. I had to get away, couldn't stop. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, closer, but I couldn't look. Then, just as quickly as it had started, the sound stopped. I paused, breathless, trying to listen for any movement. There was nothing, only the sound of my own panicked breathing. I didn't know how far I had run, but I had to keep moving. I wasn't going to stop until I found my way out. I pushed myself forward, using the last of my energy to get through the thick woods. My legs were on fire, but I couldn't stop. Not now. It felt like hours, but eventually, I stumbled onto a road. A real road, paved and lined with trees. I could barely believe it. I had made it. I didn't know how, but I had. I collapsed onto the asphalt, my body shaking. I looked around, half expecting to see someone behind me, but there was no one. The road was empty. I was alone. I sat there for a long time, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what had happened. But no answers came. I didn't know who had been following me. I didn't know why they'd chosen to stalk me through the woods. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going back there. I got up slowly, my legs unsteady. I didn't look back as I walked down the road. I didn't care where it led. I just needed to get as far away from that place as I could. I never told anyone what happened. I didn't want to seem paranoid, and I didn't want anyone to think I was crazy. But I still think about it sometimes. About the footsteps, the boot prints, and the way the woods felt like they were closing in. I never went camping again. Not there and not anywhere. It seems the tool I was using to generate documents is currently unavailable. If you would like to receive the story in any other format or need further adjustments, feel free to let me know. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. I had been feeling cooped up for too long. Work had been endless, and my apartment walls were starting to feel closer every day. I needed a break, not a vacation, just a few days away from everything and everyone. I chose a spot that wasn't too far from the city but far enough to feel removed. A few hours' drive, a long dirt road, and a trail that disappeared into thick forest. It wasn't in a park or near any established campground. Just a clearing I'd found on an old topographic map, nestled between two shallow hills. I packed light but smart, made sure I had all the basics. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, knife, first aid, even a small folding saw. I wasn't new to the outdoors, but I wasn't a hardcore survivalist either. I just wanted peace. The first few hours after setting up camp were exactly what I needed. I got there late in the afternoon and set up just before sunset. The trees caught the last bit of light and held it like glowing veins. The air was cool and dry, and the only sounds were wind and birds. I made a small fire, boiled some water for a dehydrated meal, and leaned back against a log while it cooked. That night, I slept like I hadn't in months. I woke up early, just after dawn. My camp was undisturbed, everything where I left it. I took a short walk uphill to get a view of the terrain. Trees in every direction, dense and quiet, except for the sound of distant birds. I didn't bring a GPS, just a compass and a good sense of direction. I wasn't planning to stray far. I spent the morning gathering dead wood and stacking it. By noon, I was sweaty and ready to sit for a while. That was the first time I saw the other boot print. It was just a single impression in the soft dirt near where I'd been gathering kindling. At first I thought it was mine, but the size was off, and the tread didn't match my boots. I stared at it for a while. It looked fairly recent, probably within the past day or so. I walked a slow circle around the area but didn't find any others. That was the weirdest part. Just one boot print, No trail leading to it or away. I stood there longer than I needed to, then shook it off. Maybe someone had passed through before I got there and the rest had been covered by wind or pine needles. Maybe I had just missed the rest. It didn't make sense, but I told myself it didn't have to. I spent the rest of the day closer to camp. I had this creeping feeling, like I was being watched, but I kept brushing it off. It didn't help that I had 0 cell service, but that had been the whole point. Off the grid, alone, nothing but trees, sky, and wind. That night was colder. I kept the fire going a little longer and sat closer to it. I thought I heard something in the woods around 10, branches snapping, but it was probably just a deer. I zipped the tent up tight and slept with the knife under my sleeping bag. I told myself I was just being cautious, but I wasn't fooling myself. The next morning, I noticed the shift right away. The air was still and thick. No birds, not a single chirp. That was the first real alarm bell. Even if you're not looking for it, your brain notices when the usual sounds vanish. I stepped out of my tent slowly, like something might be waiting. Everything looked the same. My fire pit was just a circle of ash and stone. My gear was untouched, but I knew something was different. I found the second boot print near the path I'd used to go uphill the day before. This one was deeper, pressed hard into the soil, like whoever left it had been standing still for a long time. Again, no others, just one, facing toward my camp. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I walked the entire perimeter of my camp, searching for more signs. Nothing, just trees and dry ground. I didn't hear a thing. No wind, no insects, the kind of silence that presses in on you. I spent the rest of the day half-packed, deciding whether to leave. I kept thinking how dumb it would be to hike out just because of a couple boot prints. But it didn't feel dumb, felt smart. I even started to write a note on a torn page from my journal, thinking if someone found it they'd know what happened, just in case. That thought hit me harder than I expected. Before sunset, I made up my mind to leave at first light. I didn't want to hike at night, and I figured one more night would be fine. I kept the fire high and tried not to think too much, but every noise in the woods snapped my head around. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw someone standing just outside the tent, waiting. When dawn came, I was already dressed and packed. I didn't even make breakfast. I just stuffed everything into my pack, kicked dirt over the fire pit, and started hiking fast. The trail wasn't marked, but I'd memorized it on the way in. I kept checking behind me. Every turn I expected to see someone following. No one did. After about an hour, I came to a fallen tree that I distinctly remembered stepping over on the way in. But something was wrong. The branches had been snapped off clean, not like they'd fallen naturally. And there was something wedged into the bark. A glove, a single work glove, dirty, old, but not weathered. And inside it, something was stuffed. I pulled it out with a stick. It was a dead bird, twisted, dried out, its neck snapped. I dropped the whole thing and backed away. My heart was pounding like it wanted out of my chest. I looked around. Nothing, just trees. I moved faster after that. At some point, I started running. I don't know how long. Maybe I missed a turn. Maybe the trail had shifted. All I know is I didn't end up back at the dirt road. I found myself at another clearing I hadn't seen before. Same kind of terrain, same kind of trees, but wrong. I dropped my pack and tried to get my bearings. That's when I saw the third boot print. This one was right next to where I dropped my pack, like it had been waiting for me. I scanned the trees, my pulse roaring in my ears. The silence was complete, not even wind. I picked up my pack and moved again, slower this time. I tried to keep my direction consistent, checking the position of the sun. But the trees looked the same in every direction. No landmarks, no sound. Hours passed. Then I started seeing the carvings. Shallow gouges in the bark of trees, low to the ground. Not initials, not random, just lines. Vertical, all the same length, spaced apart. Like tally marks. The first tree had 1. The second had 2. The third had 3. I kept moving. 4, 5, 6. I stopped at 7. The 8th tree didn't have tally marks. It had something else. A symbol I didn't recognize. Just a circle carved deep and wide, with a vertical slash through the middle. It looked like an eye. That's what my brain told me, and I hated that it did. I didn't know what direction I was heading anymore. I turned back. The trees were bare of marks in that direction. No carvings, but also no prints. That gave me some hope. Maybe whatever had been following me was only on that path. I veered sideways, just hoping to break the pattern. Late afternoon hit, and I finally found something man-made. A plastic bag, half buried in the dirt. I dug it out. Inside was a crushed can of soup, a plastic spoon, and a water bottle half full of yellowish liquid. I left it there. The sun dropped fast. I knew I couldn't move well in the dark, and I didn't want to risk injury. I found a spot between two thick trees, cleared some leaves, and sat with my back against the bigger trunk. No fire. I didn't eat. I didn't drink. I just sat with the knife in my hand and listened. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink much. I kept hearing movement. Far away at first, then closer. Leaves rustling, small sticks snapping. I held my breath more than once, waiting for something to step into the dim moonlight. But nothing came. At first light, I got moving. My legs were stiff, my back sore. But I moved. Hours passed. I didn't stop. Eventually, I heard something I hadn't heard in 2 days. A crow. One harsh call, then another. I followed the sound. I ran toward it. After maybe 30 minutes, I saw the first break in the tree line. Real sunlight, not just filtered through branches. I stepped out onto a gravel road. I didn't recognize it, but I didn't care. It was a road. I walked for what felt like forever before I saw a parked truck. No one inside, but I waited. Eventually, a man came out of the woods, rifle slung over his shoulder. He looked surprised to see me. I didn't say a word. He didn't either. He just looked at me, then nodded once and opened the passenger door. I was found. I was safe. I never went back to that area. I looked it up later, trying to figure out if there were any stories, any incidents, anything. I found nothing. Just empty land, unmarked, untouched. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I think about those boot prints, the glove, the tally marks, and I wonder how many more trees are out there, still being carved. And if someone else has seen the 9th tree,